It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Good morning. The morning after the NFC Championship game. This is Take Command. Craig Hoffman and Logan Paulsen for a final show of the 2025 season, 2024-25 season. We'll call this, Logan. And then from here, even though we'll probably do a couple more shows where we're looking back, we'll officially be in the offseason. We're going to hold on to the season, a magical one, for one more day.
Yeah, no, it was interesting, like coming back on the plane last night and being around the team and, listening to your podcast when I got home and just being like, man, like what a crazy run this thing was, like how special it was. I was talking to Bram in London post game and just kind of reviewing some high level stuff from the season, and just someone showed me a video of us picking the season at schedule release, right? That was making the rounds on the internet, and someone showed it to me. I just thought, like, to have the thoughts I had then and then to see where we ended up, like it really was like such a special kind of lightning in the bottle type of moment. And, you're winning games you shouldn't win. You're coming down to the wire. It's all these one score affairs, which are incredibly high variance, and seeing Jayden Daniels do his thing. And so, I think you captured this really well yesterday in the review show, like when you were talking about how, like this feels like the wrong way for the team to go out because they didn't die as they lived kind of thing, which is really, I think, a great point. But again, like just kind of having like a little mini like emotional recap for myself, with like all the people that I've worked with this year, talking to Santana, talking to B. Mitch, talking to Brian Colbert, like, I just like, this is so special. And it was so much fun to talk about this team. And I was talking to a couple of my friends who are big fans, and they were just like, hearing their emotional outpouring was also really interesting, because I'm a fan of the team, but I don't have the kind of emotional investment that people who've lived here their whole lives do. So hearing them talk about it and being like, yeah, man, like I can finally hold my head high again. And this was one of the things I'll remember for the rest of my life. And I haven't felt this way since, 1992 or whatever. And you're just like, man, like I didn't think of it that way in that kind of context. Cause like you're in it every day, like in a way that most fans aren't. So to hear those, like a lot of people, quite frankly, reach out and say that was really special. So it was kind of just a crazy day yesterday, and we'll talk about the game here in a second, but just a crazy, crazy year and a really fun year too.
Yeah, when I hit stop on the live show last night, that was the thing that I wish I had done. So we'll do it a little bit later, but just like reliving some of those moments, talking about the Hail Mary again, and honestly, my favorite singular moment of the year that in the moment might have been the Terry touchdown against Dallas. Now, obviously, that gets ruined 5 seconds later. Right. But like those types of moments, we'll relive a little bit later in the show. But man, it was such a special year. And walking around a little bit yesterday. Actually, I dropped my wife off. She was having lunch with some folks yesterday, and I dropped her off down the street. And like seeing the burgundy and gold out in the streets before the game, like that's just something that hasn't really been a thing. But as someone who's traveled before for this job, when I was on the beat, like, man, you go to Seattle, Philly, you go to any of these major cities where they have football teams on a game day, and like it's game day, and it's that team's game day. Like that's always what I've wanted for this town. Like you go to a Pittsburgh, like you drive around Pittsburgh in the middle of the off season, and you're like, this is a Steelers town. Yeah, and I think there's a couple reasons why that doesn't necessarily feel the case here over the last decade that I've been here. One of them is very simply like there's no billboards in this area. So like in the state of Pennsylvania, you can have billboards. And so there's the Eagles sponsorship on like, here's a beer billboard, but it's the official beer of the Eagles, or like all that kind of stuff. But like just the signs in the windows, because people felt shame about the team. Mm-hmm. And I think what you're going to see is that W insignia is going to be popping up in a lot of shop windows. It's going to be popping up in a lot of bars. It's going to be popping up in a lot of signs where people are going to be proud to say, like, I'm a Commanders fan because specifically of Jayden Daniels. Nevertheless, of all these other guys that they brought in, and we'll see how many of them are back, obviously, with the Bobbies and Zachs and all those kinds of guys. But we'll have plenty of time to talk about that. Even a little bit later in this show, but really we'll get into some of the offseason questions over the next 2 weeks here. By the way, worth mentioning off the top here, Logan is actually headed down to Mobile, so we're going to dive right into some offseason stuff pretty quick with some Senior Bowl content over the next couple of days on top of our offseason, or I guess our season look back. So we're going to be kind of juggling two balls at once. This is the cool thing about playing this deep into the year. Hopefully this is a problem that we continue to have, Logan, where we're not having to deal with the coaching cycle as much, and it's much more of hey, wow, what a great run. Hopefully the run goes a little bit longer a couple times as well. And, then we can get into offseason player eval stuff pretty quick. But for the final game of the regular season, Logan, obviously the final score gets ugly. And as I talked about on the show last night, like it's not fully indicative of just how lopsided it was. Like this game was close for a long time, within reach, really up until the Eckler fumble in the second half. Like that's the moment where it was like, oh God, here we go. And then a couple of choices that Dan makes to try to squeeze out that last little bit of possible win, not punting on a 4th and 12, for instance, that could have made the game a little more cosmetically close. But ultimately the Eagles did handle their business. They played a phenomenal football game. And the Commanders did not really give themselves a chance with their performance, and that's how you get a lopsided final score. Being on the sidelines for it, what stood out to you? Like, what was the feeling of watching, especially the unraveling, some of these turnovers in or on the sidelines at the Link?
Yeah, so it's so funny. Like you're in the game, and I think we were probably midway through the second quarter. I don't remember exactly when it was, but I just remember thinking this, like hearing that Thanos voice from the Avengers movies, like I'm inevitable. Like that's what it felt like watching it. You know what I mean? It was like, as much as you're going to struggle, as much as you're going to fight, like this is the better team today. And so no matter what's going to happen, like the Eagles are going to win. And I really felt it. I really, really started feeling it, honestly, after the first drive. And the first drive was amazing for the Commanders. Like I just thought it showed like a lot of courage, a lot of kind of stick-to-itiveness. They made a bunch of plays. Like Jayden Daniels, I thought, for how well the Philadelphia Eagle defense was seeing it, I thought they just looked great. Like he just was play after play after play. And I just like, is this sustainable? But he did it. He did a great job. They got 3 points. And then they have like the very first play of the Eagles drive is a touchdown. They have that big return. It's a 40-yard return, and they have a touchdown. It was like, oh no, you know what I mean? And I think that was the thing about it. It was just like the physicality, the speed of the Eagles. When you were on the sideline, you could just feel it. The tight windows, like, I like to stand kind of right behind Jayden. You're just like, man, there's not a lot of air here. Even on the Terry touchdown, like he's sledding that into a really tight window. And so again, there was a lot of stuff. Was
that 2nd and long to Diami on the first drive that he lasers in there? Yeah. And you're like, oh my God, if he's going to play like this, like they got a shot, but he's going to need to play like this because this is who the Eagles are.
Yeah. And I think like that was the thing. I was like, I don't care how good you are. Like it's hard to do that for 4 quarters, and, he probably could have, if the fumbles hadn't been a thing, the turnovers hadn't been a thing, but it just seemed like the offense was going to be so leveraged in this game, and they didn't really get the support from the defense. And again, like you misfit a run and you miss 2 tackles on the first play from scrimmage. Like that's just not who this team's been, and that's something that, like when I talked to Dan for Coach's Show, he was like, yeah, we got to tackle well. And we're going to tackle well, and because that's who we are. And so for that to kind of go down the way it did on the first play, I think was indicative of a larger thing. It felt, and I said this to Fletch on the broadcast, but it felt like the moment was, they could feel the moment in a way that they haven't felt it this year, right? Like there was a little bit more pressure, a little bit more angst. They could kind of feel how good Philly was. There was a little bit of over trying, right? There's the Austin Eckler fumble to me, which is an over try, right? There's the Diami fumble, which is an over try. Even the Jeremy McNichols fumble, he's kind of fighting for extra yards. The ball squirts out. Like you could just feel like people were kind of straining to do a little bit more. And sometimes that happens in a game like this. And you kind of get outside of yourself. Even if it's 5%, you expose yourself to a little bit more risk. And I felt like that's what it was. So being on the sideline, the Eagles looked amazing. They really did. And you got to give them all the credit in the world because they came out ready to rock and roll. And I think you see some of the talent that they've acquired and how impactful that is and why it's significant. Like when that offensive line's rolling, man, like they're tough to stop. Like even like on 5-yard runs, they're running duo or something. And you're just like, that line of scrimmage is moving. And it's not like guys aren't fighting. I thought Carl Davis had a great day. He really did a great job kind of inside stopping the run and playing off blocks. And John Allen, same thing. But that's hard to do for 40 plays. And we talked about that in the preview show. And so that really kind of jumped out to me on the sideline. And in the last game that they played, whenever that was, week 16 or whatever, it didn't feel quite as inevitable. In this one, I don't know if it was because it was in Philly, the crowd was really going for it. It just felt like it was, like no matter what you were going to do, it was going to be a Philly day.
Well, there's another big factor, and that is last time the quarterback was Kenny Pickett, and this time it was Jalen Hurts. And
who played well, actually.
He played probably his best game of the season.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I fully appreciated that last night. He was 18 of 20 from the pocket.
Yeah. He crushed
18 of 20. And, he's like 2 of 8 when he's outside the pocket, but 4 of those are throwaways. And I think the other thing is really encapsulated by the day that Frankie Louvu had. Like, Louvu's got 6 pressures, and a ton of them are instant unblocked. Like, he times his blitzes so well. He's just sensational. Louvu, I don't think had a great second half of the season off the edge as like a one-on-one rusher, right? Like, we talk about the Micah Parsons thing. They converted Micah Parsons to a full-time defensive end because he was so good with his hand in the dirt or as a stand-up 2-point stance rusher. One-on-one, he will destroy you. Frankie doesn't actually beat a lot of offensive tackles one-on-one with pass rush moves, certainly at like some elite rate. But as a blitzer, he's incredible. And he gets in the backfield 6 times in this game, 6 pressures. And Jaylen just shakes him off time after time after time. He's got the 1 sack, obviously, on the cross dog where they confuse Dickerson and Calcaterra. But they, other than that, like, he gets in the backfield and Jaylen just like slides and is able to easily just have Frankie get a hand on him and slide right by. And that inability to finish, I think that was when the defense was at its worst this year, was when they would get pressure and not finish. And there's just kind of this, oh no, here we go. And there's a ton of that in this game where you need to get home, you need to generate the negative plays, you need to get sacks, and instead you're leaving your coverage out to dry because often those are on blitzes and your coverage is requiring your rush to get home. And they go knock on the front door and then ultimately nobody's home.
Yeah, and I do think to Frankie's credit, he has the sack, he has a couple of pressures which force incompletions, which I think are huge.
Sure.
That's huge to acknowledge.
And Frankie had a good day. I'm saying Jaylen does such an incredible job of not turning those into the worst possible outcomes.
Yeah, and that's all I was just going to double click on there. Like, 2nd and 10 is different than 2nd and 15 or 2nd and 16 after a sack. And there's one where Dorrance Armstrong or Dante Fowler has a really beautiful pass rush on Jordan Mailata. I felt like Fowler had a really good feel for snap count and kind of how to get by Mailata, who's been one of the best pass protecting one of the best tackles period in football. And so he gets a pressure, but Hurts kind of gets out of it and scrambles away and throws the ball away, and you're like, man, that should have been a sack for a 6-yard loss, but it's a throwaway, and it puts you back in 2nd and 10. It lets your offense stay on schedule. It's one of the things I thought Jayden did a great job in this game as well of not taking big sacks. I think he took 2 maybe, if I remember correctly. Yeah. But on the whole, making good decisions to throw the football away. And it was interesting to watch Jaylen play that way because he has not played that way the last couple of weeks. He's turning all these pressures into sacks at a really high rate, and you're kind of hoping that happens for you in this game. And I thought, like Frankie Louvu, we mentioned Fowler. I think Dorrance Armstrong had a pretty good game rushing the passer. Jerzon has a pressure where he's like basically, holding Jaylen like almost in his grasp and he throws the football away. It's just like, if you're able to get, let's say 4 sacks out of that, this is a different game. And I think Jaylen deserves a lot of credit for how he played and just the decision making. The offensive line did a great job in terms of like mitigating quick pressures for the most part. But when that opportunity arose and you're not able to close the deal, I think that's a pretty significant moment. And so, yeah, Jaylen did a great job, as a runner, as a scrambler, and making decisions in the pocket. Even though he's not, making these decisive, quick game, ball out kind of decisions, like this is another kind of decision making that he deserves a lot of credit for.
Yeah, but he does make some of those in this game, right? Like some of the quick outs and things like that. And they're not that hard of decisions, but they're decisions ultimately, sure. And he executes them. He probably turns a couple of down. Brady mentioned that on the TV broadcast, that there's like a couple of shots down the field where he's like, I don't really know why he didn't throw that one. But some of the RP, that's the thing I think sometimes, I say there's 2 things we often probably don't give Hurts enough credit for because we spend so much time being like, if you can get him in the pocket and make him beat you from the pocket, like you've got a great chance. And like, that's in part because the other alternative is letting them hand the ball to Saquon Barkley 30 times and let their offensive line grade on you. And so like it turns into this almost quasi Jalen Hurts bashing, and he doesn't really deserve that as a player because he does two other things really well. He operates the RPO game at an extraordinarily high level, and that is significant. He does a fantastic job with a huge part of their offense. That seems relevant. And then the other thing that he does that they noted, maybe on the broadcast, maybe I was listening to the Athletic show this morning, and maybe it was Robert who mentioned this. His pre-snap stuff is awesome.
Did a great job of that. That's something you don't see. Like when it doesn't come across on the All-22, but he's doing a lot on the line of scrimmage, like a significant amount. Like I think one of the guys that I was most impressed with this year was Lamar Jackson, kind of in big moments, like getting to the right play. But and again, like those lead to big explosives. This was more like every time I'm checking protection, I'm working an Oscar, I'm working a can. And I was just like, I didn't realize that he was doing so much at the line of scrimmage for this team. So that's a great point for sure.
And that, especially for a team that's super run heavy, getting in the right run is like critical. I mean, and he does that. The first play is a check.
Yeah, and I wish I got to go back and watch and see what kind of front they were in, but that's the same run that Detroit ran, not Detroit, Baltimore ran earlier in the season, where they're kind of quick pitching it to Derrick Henry on the perimeter. And so I wonder if it was an alignment check or a front check or a personnel check. But to your point, like it gets you in better looks, it makes you more efficient, it gets you on schedule. And even though this was an annoying sequence of like 5 attempted tush pushes, like his use of cadence down in that area there of just kind of to be annoying and spam the Commanders, I thought was really interesting. And again, like it just shows his control of the offense and the tools that he has at his disposal. And you don't see it all the time, but I felt like it was at the forefront in a big way this game.
Yeah, for sure. And on that first run, man, Dante Fowler just like does this weird spin move, and it winds up taking out John. It winds up taking out, which kind of trips up Bobby, and then the two safeties miss tackles, and then it's out, and Saquon, and 15 carries for Saquon. That's all it took for him to get. I think it was like $125, 118, and 3 touchdowns. That second TD run from him, which is his second carry of the game, by the way, is gross. Frankie's unblocked in the hole.
Oh yeah,
unblocked, and Saquon's ability to read it, jump cut, get outside, and then Lane Johnson does an awesome job on Armstrong on the edge, and obviously Saquon wins a foot race because Saquon doesn't lose foot races. So that was I think that kind of covers the Eagles having the ball, especially up front. Anything else? I mean, I actually real quick before we get off of that. The other thing that killed me for the Commanders' defense was the penalties. And I'm not talking about complaining about the refs because and while there were some, I think, questionable calls, I talked about it on the show last night. The Sean Hockley thing's annoying, and he definitely had some bad ones. But, like, the lack of discipline in the secondary, I think, is really, like, problematic in this game.
Yeah.
Like, the inability to just not – and the Mikey one on the sideline is killer. Because you forced a field goal after the McNichols fumble, and instead you give them a first down and they wind up scoring a touchdown. But like Saquon could easily cut that back, and I would like to see a little more leeway there from the referees for sure. But technically his foot hit, and it's something that I think with that incident, the Mahomes thing last week, like there's been a couple of others that are right on the sideline. It's something that I think the NFL is probably going to have to address this offseason of like, if you are running out of bounds, you need to make it clear you're going out of bounds. And we're going to give defensive players, like, unless you egregiously blow a guy up, we need to find a way to not have that be brutal. You're an offensive player, though, so you might have different feelings on that. And then we can talk about the Lattimore penalty in a second. On
the Saquon thing, like, to me, again, I'm watching it live, so, like, my reaction is going to be a little bit different. I thought the penalty was totally justified. Again, like I thought it looked like to me like he's clearly running out of bounds. And I think the other thing too, if it wasn't such a big hit out of bounds, it's probably okay. Right. Like I think it was like he got laid out, man. He kind of falls into the cheerleaders. It's a whole thing. And I think if you hit him, and he keeps his feet, it's probably okay. But again, it's like at that point, he almost had 2 feet out of bounds, at least to my eye, like where I was standing. He almost had 2 feet out of bounds. He wound up having 1 foot out. He was out. It was
his foot had barely hit when the contact happens. But I think to your point, right? If you're Mikey and you come up and you kind of wrap and you make sure your chest is on him. So if he tries to cut back, like you can go.
Yeah.
But it's also Saquon Barkley, and like trying to tackle that dude's impossible. So I get it's a tough spot for Mikey, but yeah,
But I guess like
that one didn't really bother me. It bothered me that he committed the penalty, not that they called it.
Right. Yeah. So I think that was the thing. Is like Bram was like all in a tizzy about it. Like that's a terrible call, and I actually thought it was a fine call. Like could you have not called it? Sure, but is it by letter of the law a penalty? Yes. And like when you're watching it live, you're like, dang. And I think that's the other thing. Being on the sideline, I have a much greater appreciation for how bang bang a lot of these calls are. You know what I mean? Like if you're not in the right position or if you see it a certain way, like for example, like there's a holding call or something against Detroit where like I had a good line on it and Fletch and everybody else is freaking out in the booth, but you're like, oh, that's for sure a penalty. You know what I mean? It just gives you a different feel. And then when you get to watch the replay later, on the TV copy, you're like, oh man, like I didn't even see these 12 different angles of my sympathy for the referee, which is probably not a popular opinion today, is much greater than it is normally. Right. And again, like I'm not a big ref guy. So again, like that call, is it frustrating for fans? I'm very sure it's frustrating for fans. Is it probably a legitimate call? Probably. I could have gone either way.
It was a legitimate call because they said Pereira said on the broadcast, that's the thing they can actually overturn if they deem that he's inbounds. Yeah. And because they see the foot hit, even if they're like, oh man, that's probably pretty soft, like we can't overturn it because functionally it was the correct call. What about the Lattimore PI? Because that one, there's a grab, and it's just like that. The way Marshawn plays is he's going to challenge the referees to throw flags, and since he's been here, they've flagged him a ton.
They threw a flag. And I do think that, this is something that happened with Benjamin St-Juste early in the season. Like, Benjamin St-Juste, I think, gets a reputation. Like, they study film, too. They understand kind of the player reputation and, what they're going to do and what they should be looking for. And I think the opposing teams also present stuff to the officials. Like, I know there's been a couple times, on teams I've played for where they're like, hey, this player... the Lane Johnson thing is a great example. He leaves early. I want you to make you aware of it. I want you to watch it. Right. And so, I do think that, and again, I don't have any inside baseball on this, but it does look like that they are aware of how he plays. And for me, again, on the PI in the end zone, I was like, why are you grabbing him so much? I was watching them.
It's
I was watching
3rd and 13 and Jaylen is running for his life.
I was watching the two of them and I was like, he is pulling on him more than is necessary. I'm okay. I'm a big, if you're playing DB, you got to do what you got to do, right? You got to get hands on. Even the Jeremy Chin one later, I kind of get it, right? He's pushing off, you're pulling, you're fighting a little bit. They throw a flag, whatever, right? But I was like, they're going to call this, right? They're going to call a penalty here. And I really thought he got away with one on the Dallas Goedert touchdown too. When you go back and watch, we had live, his hands are through his hands before the ball is there. They don't throw it. They let him play a little bit. So I'm not saying that but to me, he was by himself. He was on the corner. AJ Brown's running the corner. I was like, I would have thrown a penalty. You know what I mean? And again, I don't have all the angles, but from where I was standing, I was like, that's probably going to be PI or holding or whatever it is. So, and then the kind of how he gets emotionally involved in the game, I think I appreciate that as a player. I love when guys are fired up, but you also got to be smart, you got to be smart. And, both those penalties were kind of backbreaking in a lot of ways. So, it's hard playing corner in the NFL. There's a spotlight on you. It's an offensive driven league. They're going to call that stuff more oftentimes than not. But I think just being smart about when you do it and what you're doing. I think that's the other thing is Mike Sanderson had one that I was watching and he gave at the top of a route, gave a little tug and the ball was going the other way, but gave a little tug, makes a break on the ball, no harm, no foul. Right. This one, it was just he was all over him. And you're kind of saying I have to, as a referee, I have to call this because it's going to be on TV. They're going to talk about it. So, it was a tough couple plays for the Washington secondary for sure.
Yeah. All right. We will talk. I know there's a lot of chatter about what to do with Lattimore, and a kind of a, let's talk about that trade now that the season's over thing. We'll do that on a later show for sure. I'm sure that'll be one of the top questions we get in the mailbag episode, if not something we just talk about beforehand on our own. So we'll do that in a little bit. But quick break, come back. We'll talk about the offense, and then we'll put a bow on the season, at least the first bow on what was a magical season. It deserves many bows. Take command, Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulsen. Logan, let's talk about the offense real quick before we put the bows on the season. And this wasn't my favorite Cliff game. Terry kind of disappears for a while. Don't love that. And in part because he lines up 40 of 48 snaps on the left side, where they had been moving him around quite a bit more, especially against the Eagles, because Kenyon Mitchell, who gets the pick in this game very late. But the bigger thing with the offense is between the game script, the fumbles, this game plan never gets a chance to really evolve into its full bloom. So who knows what kind of counters and stuff Cliff might have had if this is a closer game late. What'd you make of the offense in general and their struggles against the number one defense? But also, they scored 23. That's 7 more than anyone else was scoring on average on this defense in the postseason. So what do you make of it?
Yeah, I thought they did actually like a pretty good job. And I thought, Cliff did a good job understanding like kind of where the weak spot is in the Philly defense. And that was with Zach Ertz as the tight end. I mean, he had 11 receptions. A lot of them were versus man coverage. A lot of them were on third down. And really that was a matchup that they're able to exploit. And, talking about offseason things, like what are you going to do with him, man? Like he's been such a beautiful piece and element to this offense. Like, that's something that's got to be really kept an eye on, but we'll talk about that more later. So to me, I thought that was the plan, quite honestly. It was like, we're going to get Zach Ertz in favorable matchups, and he's going to win one-on-ones. And that's a bold strategy for a guy who's, 33, 34 years old, but he did it.
He's 34.
He knocked it out of the park, man. He just ran brilliant routes. He gave Jalen Hurts kind of someone he could consistently turn to in big moments. And so, I understand Terry wasn't the biggest part of the game plan, but I also understand that like that's kind of the strength of the secondary is on the perimeter. If you want to kind of work an element, it's Reed Blankenship and man coverage versus Zach Ertz. And so I thought that seemed to be the moment, right? We're going to kind of motion, we're going to shift, we're going to formation in a way where that's the matchup. And I thought Jayden did a great job exploiting it. So even though Terry wasn't a piece, like that's one of the things about the offense that I've really appreciated is that they've done a good job of kind of saying, hey, like this is the person for this week. And this week it was Zach. And I thought they did a great job executing that. And I really think when you go back and watch, like there was a lot of attention paid to Terry, like a lot more. And it's not maybe specifically Terry, but they called certain coverage structures and did certain things that you're definitely aware of him, right? So like there was one play I remember where they're in a 4-by-1, the 4 receivers are to the right, and then Terry's by himself to the left. So usually in a Vic Fangio defense, the safety that's to the single receiver side, he lines up there to the single receiver side, but he's going to match to the 4 receiver side. Like he'll work across formation, essentially assuring a one-on-one on Terry. They played a cloud coverage there, which is not something that they normally do. So even though it wasn't like, let's make sure that we take Terry totally out of this game plan, they definitely were aware of his big playability and what he does on a down-to-down basis. And I also think you got to give Kenyon Mitchell a little bit of credit. Like in man-to-man situations, like he did a great job. It was very physical. Awesome. Darius Slade did a great job. And, Cooper DeJean also did a great job. So, and this is something that like we talked about it a little bit last night on the phone when I got back. But this defense is really good because they can play tight man coverage all the time. Not all the time, but a big percentage of the time. And they understand their zones. They understand how to match. And there's just not a lot of air, right? Not a lot of air for those outside receivers. And they have a pass rush they can get home with 4, and they're good at blitzing. So this was going to be a slog. And so the fact they were able to score 24 points in a relatively efficient fashion, like coming out of this game, there's not a lot of things to be positive about. But the level that Jayden Daniels played at in this game in terms of handling adversity, handling the rush, tight window throws over the middle of the field, this was big-time stuff from him. And I really wish that again, they would have been a little bit more fastidious with the football because I think as the game would have worn on, I think the Philadelphia defense would have fatigued to a point where some of those explosive plays down the field become a little bit more viable. And they're not in these like deep cover 2 looks and deep quarters looks, like where you can't get anything going down the field. And so that's one of the disappointing things for me about this game, because I felt like Cliff came out ready to rock and roll. I felt like Jayden came out ready to rock and roll, and I felt like they had a good game plan early. I love some of the early whams and whams specifically that they ran on Jalen Carter and leading the 6-yard gain, which is something that you never thought you'd see versus Philadelphia. So there was a lot of elements that I really appreciated, but I do agree that like they never got to actualize kind of their downfield stuff because of game flow, really. Like that was the one thing we talked about, is like, can you get to a point where you're leading a game, you force Vic Fangio to be more aggressive, you force Jalen Hurts to be more aggressive, and we just never got that. And this is the result, part of the result.
Yeah, Jayden proved that he can go win a game 5 yards at a time again, which is
crazy. That's so challenging to do, man. It's so challenging to do.
The problem is the team can't, not against the Eagles, because the reason that you want to do that as a defense is because it creates more opportunities for the offense to mess up. Penalties or turnovers. And that's exactly what happened. Like, you can say, oh, that first drive is amazing. Well, one, you don't get a touchdown out of it. And two, when you go to try to repeat it on the next drive, like, Diami fumbles. And that is not in character for Diami by any stretch, but it's like in character for why you don't play that way if you don't have to in the NFL. It's because defenses are too good. And this Eagles defense specifically is very, very good at going after the ball. Like, they are aggressive, trying to rake it out, and they find success. They have opportunities. Aaron Andrews actually had a great anecdote on the broadcast about how Nick Sirianni preaches, if a guy goes down and gets up, that is an opportunity to knock out the football. That ball is going to be loose. And so Sirianni was apparently like elated because that's a thing for him, and that's how they get the Eckler one, is Austin tries to get up and you know, the ball gets punched out because it's away from his body. It's not an easy thing to do, to get up and secure the football and stay on balance. So playing that way, preventing explosives, invites the kind of turnover variance that Washington had in this game. They've just been so tremendous this year at avoiding it. And that's the thing that's really impressive about them. And so I think if you're Dan, you're continuing to be like, you probably look back, you do a review, and you go, you know what? We're not going to do it 18 weeks, but if we can do it 17 and not have that one be our last game, like, let's just get that out of the way in week 6 next year. I feel pretty good about the operation that we have and the way we're coaching things and all that kind of stuff. Not that you're not looking to get better, but you feel pretty good about it. And then if you're Adam, you're looking at it and you're like, how do we get the rest of the team to be able to win 5 yards at a time, or more guys that can turn 5 yards into 50 yards?
I was about to say.
And that would be, you know, you got Terry who can do it. Diami showed some ability to do that this year, which makes that fumble hurt all the more. But like, you need more explosive playmakers, and you have money to spend, and you have a quarterback on a rookie contract, and like, that's the part that's exciting. But you know, I think it's worth pointing out that like, while Jayden can operationally do that, and that is like, it's hard to describe how valuable that is. That you can just stack decision on decision on him and feel good about it. But you need the rest of the group, offensive line and skill positions, to be able to get to his level.
Yeah, and I think this is, in some ways, this is the perfect scenario. And I know that sounds crazy, because obviously perfect scenario is winning the Super Bowl. So maybe this is like perfect in like that this is like sub-perfect stack 2, right? Or whatever we're talking about.
Yeah.
But I think when you look at this season, man, what a blessing. Like, just incredible level of competition, incredible level of brotherhood. It brings the city back to life. The football is there. But it also, to me, is so fitting that this loss happens versus this Philadelphia team, because it shows you exactly what you need to do, right? You need to get someone on the offensive line who can consistently win a one-on-one versus Jalen Carter. You need to get a receiver or an explosive playmaker, whatever it is, tight end, slot receiver, who can win consistently versus man-to-man coverage and can help you find these explosive plays down the field, right? Defensively, you look and you say, hey, how do we account for this offensive line of Philadelphia? How do we find a DB that can consistently match? And Marshawn Lattimore might be this guy. I'm not saying that that's not the case, but, you know, because he's only played 3 games this year, so how healthy or whatever. But like that, these are the things now that you go into the off season saying, if that's the peak of the mountain, what do we need to do to get there? And I think that that's something that's so fantastic for the organization, because it leaves this salty, disgusting taste in your mouth. And you're like, I must be dogmatically motivated to be better and find better solutions for the team. And so, because you said, like, for how awesome Jayden was this year, like, just tremendous, like, really, like, you can't overstate how good he was. It's just statistically, mathematically, from a football analytics perspective, going on 15-play drives in the NFL is a very low probability. And we did that how many times this year? We did it a bunch. And so how do you deleverage those moments? How do you deleverage the one-score games? And so I do think that this is in some ways, this is good. This is good for them to see, because it's like, hey, this is how the team has to grow.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll start tackling that stuff later in the week with some of the Logan Senior Bowl coverage, and obviously we'll continue to get to it the rest of the offseason, because that's what the offseason is about, is who's available, what options exist, and I'm sure Adam Peters and his staff is already hard at work on that. But for now, let's put a bow on this magical season one last time. Take command. Craig Hoffman here. Logan Paulsen there. Logan, when I say 2024-25 Washington Commanders season, like, what are the images? What are the things that are going to come to mind for you that you'll carry with you for the rest of your career, the rest of your life?
I mean, the first one that comes to mind is obviously the Cincinnati game. In Cincinnati, like, I think it was a Monday night, Sunday night game. I don't
Monday
remember.
night.
Primetime game, and the plays that Jayden made in that game. Like the atmosphere, and you're like, man, this could be something special. And how that kind of sparked. You go to Arizona, you blow Arizona out, who prior to that, like, went toe to toe with the Bills. Like, it was that was one to me that was like, this is going to be a special year. Then obviously,
just real quick on the Cincinnati one, like, I think that one's also so magical, because rare are the times where we just know, like, oh, that's the moment the star was born. And Jayden to Terry to close that game out, getting blasted in the face on a third down, just I think it wound up at the end of the season being the third most unlikely completion according to Next Gen. It was like a 10% completion percentage. The window he had to fit it in, the pressure, the everything. And you're like, oh, that's the moment. Like, a star was born right there on Monday Night Football with that touchdown to close out that game. And, like, that's such a great call. And I know it's the first one chronologically, but, like, that's such a great moment, like, just because you just know. Like, that's like the Hail Mary is the explosion, but, like, the star, like, starting to burn, that's Cincinnati wins the moment.
Yeah, and I think it was so significant because, like, how many times in your coverage of the team has the team lost a game like that? Like, where they're the underdog on the road, there's a little bit of adversity, you can feel it start to slip away. And then
the better quarterback comes out and rips your heart out because Joe Burrow is
you're like, man,
on the other side.
Like, if they kick a field goal here, or if they punt the football here, or whatever it was, I think it was field goal. If they kick a field goal here, they lose the game because Joe Burrow is going to drive down the field and score. And to make the right decision on third down, to be aggressive and go get it, and the fourth down conversion they made before that, it just felt different. It felt like the staff was so locked in. It felt like the players were so locked in. And to see them make the play in that moment, it was just like, this is different. This is different right now, and it'll be different for the rest of the season because of the mindset and the approach and the stick-to-itiveness of everybody on the roster. I think that was the other thing that was so cool about it. And it really was like a forecast for what the rest of the year would be. And I think about that game so fondly because of all of those boxes it checked from a coaching, a leadership, and a playmaking standpoint, and we got to see that kind of carry through the rest of the year.
Yeah, for sure. There's then so many others. I mean, even like the week before the Giants game of the 7 field goals, you're like, how many games have they lost like that over the years? You're like, I don't know, maybe this, maybe this Quinn guy knows what he's doing. Maybe this is a little bit different. So that was, I think, really fun. The Hail Mary is obviously going to be like one of the signature moments of his career, of anybody. Like, it's a signature NFL history moment. Yeah. Everything that happened leading up to that, it was such a wacky game where Washington was so good, but all of a sudden they kind of fall apart defensively in the final 6 minutes, and then they just pull that out of nowhere. But they need the play right before it, and then Stevenson's yapping at the crowd or whatever his name is for the Bears. Like it's that one's just always going to be a huge moment for everybody. And Nance and Romo were there. Like I think that like the bigness of that, it's a 425 game. That play happens under the lights. Darkness, like in the black uniforms. It's there's just like a magicalness and like a theatrical nature, a cinematic nature to that moment. And then the next time we're in that stadium is the Dallas game. When, again, like I talked about this off the top of the show, where he hits Terry and Terry makes this incredible 6-yard touchdown. And obviously the extra point goes sideways and they wind up losing that game in heartbreaking fashion, and the kickoff return. And that was a wild game. But like that moment where like the Hail Mary is one thing and it almost feels lucky. The combo of the Hail Mary and the Terry play with Dallas is the moment where you're just like, I don't know, man, this kid's special. This kid's different. He's capable of anything. And that point, you just fasten your seatbelt and be like, we're on a roller coaster ride, and I'm good with it. Wherever this thing goes, my hands are up, and I'm screaming, woo!
Yeah, I mean, shoot, like any end of game scenario that they were in, like the touchdown Mariota had to Terry in the second Dallas game, the drive in overtime versus Atlanta was tremendous. You know what I mean? Like
J-Mo on the Philly Week 16 winner.
100%. And then, the Terry completion in the 2-minute drive at the end of half in the second Giants game, where you're like, there's 19 seconds left and we hit a freaking go ball for a touchdown. Like the way they handled all of those. I mean, shoot, even the 2-minute situation in this last game to get a field goal, like there's 34 seconds. They just the professionalism, the kind of just the surgical efficiency of this team was just incredible. Obviously there's defensive plays like in Detroit, like where Quan returns that ball for a touchdown. Like that was incredible. The Mike Sanderson interception, like there was plays like that. We're just like, this is incredible. It was just an incredible year of guys kind of all punching above their weight class, being great teammates, great football players, and yeah, man, it was awesome. You know what I mean? It was just really special.
I think that's a great point. Like this is such a likable team, and not all great teams are likable, and that's okay. Like your fans are gonna like them.
Yeah.
But like I think part of the endearing nature of this team is like, oh, they're underdogs, and I know Quinn hates that, and I get it, but like they are. They're whenever you're punching above your weight class, like people like it. But also, the more you got to know the guys, like Jayden is very, very likable. Terry is endlessly likable. You have a guy like Bobby who's like playing at a really high level when he's a gold jacket guy and couldn't be a better dude. Zach, like Austin, like there's just so many great Mikey, like so many great personalities on this team that as people got to know them and they are seeing the success, it's like, man, I love rooting for this team. I can't tell you how many Eagles fans that are friends of mine were like, hey, I obviously we want to win, but like, man, it's fun to watch your team play. And like that's the Washington Philadelphia thing. I think if a couple more matchups in the NFC Championship game, they're not going to like Jayden Daniels as much. But like, that is the nature of things. But yeah, man, I think a season full of moments, carried out by a bunch of great dudes, led by a bunch of great dudes, Dan on down, AP on down, Josh Harris, Magic Johnson, Mitch Rales on down.
That was cool. Like when he spoke to the team, when he spoke to the media after Magic Johnson spoke to the media after the Tampa game. You know what I mean? Like just incredible, man. And
yeah. Every time I'm just like, that's Magic Johnson. He's the owner of the Commanders, or part owner of the Commanders.
And then, like, some little stuff for me is like when you're on the sideline at the Detroit game and the ownership group is like coming up to you to say, hey, and to say you're doing a great job on the show, and just how different that is and was than, prior to my time here before. Like, it was just a special year, like really special year, and one that I'll remember for the rest of my life, obviously. But it's dotted by these extremely special moments, and so hopefully this is the first of many special seasons. But yeah, this just seemed very unique in, like even like Noah Brown coming in off the street basically, right, and like being a huge contributor to the team, and then Diami's growth and development. And I don't know, man, like it was, and like the offensive line playing so well in a couple games. Like it was a cool year. And like you said, a bunch of likable dudes. And this is the one thing about the NFL that I find really interesting is that, like this roster will never be this roster again. And it's such a kind of time capsule of this year. And so I'm glad that these guys all got to experience something so special playing the way that they were playing.
I can't agree more. If you are watching this on YouTube and you want to drop your favorite moment of the year in the comments, I think that'll be a fun way to reminisce even more, maybe capture some moments that we forgot. So go ahead and do that wherever you or I guess on YouTube where you are watching, and maybe we'll read off a couple of those on the next show. For now, thanks so much for listening. Look, we cannot do the show if we don't have an audience of people who care and are interested and like what we're doing and tell their friends and watch it grow, and because then our bosses would replace us. So we are very grateful for all of you who do all of those things, and the kind words that we've gotten throughout this season, how much you guys have enjoyed being on the ride with us. Like, we feel that, we appreciate that, and we can't thank our team enough. Our producer William Foshi and Eli Karp and everybody at Jake Golly, everybody up at Corporate at Odyssey. I'm gonna stop naming names, otherwise that team is very large, and all of a sudden I'm gonna start forgetting people. So shout out to everybody up in New York and Philly at our corporate offices who helps out with this show as well. And the good thing is for all you listening that like it, we're not going anywhere. We got a lot of off-season work to do, and we're really excited about that. As much fun as the football is, and it's all building to the football. The off-season is a fun time in the NFL, so we're going to enjoy that as well and see where Adam and this front office takes it next. In the meantime, for Logan, I'm Craig. We'll see you guys next time on Take Command. Take care of yourselves this week, and we will see you in just a couple of days. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.